we can do that.
Okay, I got it started, but it's not completed yet, so. Okay, we're live.
Thank you, Darlene. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Joint Standing Committee on Veterans and Legal Affairs. Happy Valentine's Day. My name is Craig Hickman. I represent 11 towns in Southern Kennebec County, including my hometown of Winthrop here in the Maine Senate. Today on our agenda, we have 4 work sessions regarding the medical use of marijuana program. But before we move into our agenda, I'll begin with committee introductions, starting today with Senator Farron.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. My name is Brad Farron. I live in Norwich Walk, and I have the privilege of representing folks in Senate District 3, which is the majority of Somerset County, and the town of Rome and Kennebec County. Thanks for everybody for being here this morning.
Representative Riley.
Hello, and happy Valentine's Day. I'm Representative Riley. I represent House District 34, which is part of Westbrook.
Representative Supika.
Good morning. I'm Representative Laura Supika, and I represent District 126, which is a portion of Bangor.
Representative Kinney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm using 2 different devices because my audio is not working on my camera, on my computer. I'm Mary Ann Kinney. I represent House District 99, which are 9 towns in Western Waldo County.
Representative McCray.
Good morning. I'm Jay McCray, representing Harpswell, West Bath, and Northeast Brunswick in the House.
Representative Doloff.
Good morning, Representative Joe Sandola, District 115 in the Western Mountains in Oxford County. Happy Valentine's Day.
Representative Wood.
Good morning. I'm Barb Wood, and I represent House District 38, which is the western end of the peninsula in Portland. And I'm looking forward to going out into Portland to see if the Valentine Bandit struck again this year.
The Valentine Bandit? We'll have to talk about that. Representative Corey.
Good morning. I'm Patrick Corey. I serve House District 25, which is part of Wyndham.
And Jeremy Diazzo.
Good morning, Chris Chiazzo, House District 28, beautiful Western Scarborough, and happy Valentine's Day to all, including the Valentine's Bandit of Portland.
We have with us today, subbing for Karen, Darlene Semino is our committee clerk. So if you have any technical issues or questions, please reach out to her. And we also have our analyst, Sam Prower, who will be helping us decide on great language to put in our bills. So the goal today is to be finished expeditiously by noon. That's for everyone to hear. We're going to consider 3 bills together in a work session to hear from the department and the stakeholders about how to move forward on getting a bill reported out that will deal with some emergency issues. And then we will hear LD 1784 from Senator Chloe Maxman separately. So we're going to open up the work session on LD 421, an act to increase the number of plants a medical marijuana caregiver may cultivate. We're going to open up the work session on LD 1928, an act to update and clarify the Maine Medical Use of Marijuana Act and provide for greater transparency, and LD 1948, an act to enhance access to education regarding patient and community safety in Maine's marijuana programs. This work session will be a little free-flowing. I'm going to ask a member of the industry and the department to come to talk to us about the progress that they have had in meetings since we met last. We have 3 vehicles here. We only need 1. So we're going to hear from the industry, of course, about which one of those bills we would like to move forward. And then LD 1784 will take a separate vote later in the day after we finish these work sessions. So with that, Sam, if you want to just, I don't think we need to discuss LD 421 too much, but you can just give us a brief overview of 1928 and 1948, and then I will invite the industry and the department into our meeting to discuss where they are behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Hickman. So I just want to be clear, should I just, I won't go through and read like every single item, but should I go through the bill analysis for each bill so the committee is kind of aware of what's in front of them and then you turn back to you? Okay.
Correct. Thank you, sir.
Great. Let me pull up my share screen here. So I'll move off this one quickly because it's short, but can everyone see this to start?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So this is the bill analysis that I had from last year. As you'll remember, LD 421 was a carryover. It's a pretty simple bill. It increases the number of mature plants from that a caregiver may cultivate from 30 to 60, and the number of immature plants from 60 to 120. There wasn't a whole lot else to say on this, and it sounds like the committee's pretty comfortable with it, so I'll move forward. And before I go to my other bill analyses, I wanted to point out one other document I gave the committee for today's work session. And I'm going to pull it up now. And this is a little bill analysis companion document. And some of this information may not be relevant anymore if there's another plan about how to move forward, but I wanted to point out to you that I did create a bill section overlap chart for the bills we're working on today. And this was just pointing out sections where we have provisions in each of these bills that do the same thing or something similar or amend the same section of law. So up here, we've got the LD numbers, and then here we've got the overlap provisions, and I've tried to make clear which sections of the bills have overlap. And if you're just going to move forward with one vehicle, it probably won't be necessary to look at the chart, but if you end up moving forward with more than one, this hopefully will help ensure that we don't create conflicts. The other thing, speaking of conflicts, I just wanted to mention is I excerpted here the relevant portion of the medical marijuana statute that deals with tracking and record keeping. And when I was putting together my bill analyses for this work session, I noticed that we created a conflict that I forgot to flag or missed flagging last session. And that's here in subparagraph 2 in paragraph A. As you'll see, this link goes to the chaptered version of LD 939 from last session that change the record keeping requirements to a period of 4 years rather than a period of 7. And it appears that what happened is when we deleted subparagraph 3, which I believe was the third-party audit provision here through LD 1242, we had to add an and to connect subparagraph 2 to what's now subparagraph 4. And I believe this is what resulted in us having 2 conflicting provisions. So when the committee is deciding what it wants to do today, you might want to consider whether you want to resolve this conflict here.
Yes.
And then just going forward, I also provided some information for the committee just about the sections of law that refer to business entities and the prohibition on collectives. It seemed to me that there's often a discussion about what kind of business entity a caregiver may organize their business as. And the chapter contains 2 provisions that I think may be what's creating tension for people, but you'll see that the biggest disorganization section is about how a caregiver may be organized, and that the collective prohibition is really about how they may conduct business. So those are here, and I won't go into it unless there end up being questions about it, but I wanted you to have those excerpted for you. And then 2 of the bills talk about telehealth encounters, and I wanted to provide you the telehealth encounter definitions right here in this document, and also kind of like brief references to what they mean. So that's just here. I tried to wanted to have all this information in one place before moving forward. And so without further delay, I'll go into the rest of the bill analyses for today.
Are there any questions from the committee so far about what Sam has put in front of us? Seeing no hands raised, please continue, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So LD 1928, an act to update and clarify the Maine Medical Use of Marijuana Act and provide for greater transparency. Bear with me, this bill has quite a few provisions and I don't want to miss anything. So this bill does the following. First, it requires that, notwithstanding Maine Revised Statutes, Title V, Section 8072, subsection 11, so this is the major substantive rulemaking provision, or any other law, provision of law to the contrary, major substantive rules that are provisionally adopted by the department relating to the Maine Medical Use of Marijuana Act and submitted for legislative review may not be finally adopted by the department unless the legislation authorizing the final adoption of those rules is enacted into law. Second, it requires that the department evaluate how its provisionally adopted rules that are submitted for legislative review sought to minimize the economic burdens on small businesses in accordance with Title V, Section 852, subsection 5A, and to include a copy of that evaluation with its rules when they are submitted for legislative review. Third, it limits the circumstances under which a law enforcement officer may access a location in which a caregiver, dispensary, manufacturing facility, or marijuana testing facility operates. Fourth, it limits disclosure to a law enforcement officer of information that could reasonably identify an individual patient's identity without a warrant requiring the disclosure. Fifth, it authorizes the use of telehealth services for medical providers to meet with patients seeking a written certification for the medical use of marijuana. Sixth, it provides that educational materials required to be given to qualifying patients may be provided electronically. Seventh, it prohibits the department from requiring a registered caregiver, registered dispensary, marijuana testing facility, or manufacturing facility to use a particular electronic system for tracking marijuana plants and harvested marijuana. Eighth, it requires the department to compile and make publicly available a monthly report of sales tax data for all wholesale and retail transactions reported under the Maine Medical Use of Marijuana Act. Ninth, it provides that if the department fails to issue or deny a valid registry identification card for an assistant of a caregiver within 14 days of the submission of an application for issuance or renewal, the registry identification card is provisionally granted. 10th, it prohibits the department from requiring testing of harvested marijuana unless the legislature approves a testing standard that is reliable, consistent, and science-based and provides useful information to qualifying patients or medical providers. 11th, it provides that an assistant of a caregiver or a registered dispensary may work for any caregiver or registered dispensary as long as the assistant obtains a registry identification card. 12th, it prohibits the department from requiring a caregiver, registered dispensary, marijuana testing facility, or manufacturing facility to submit its standard operating procedures to the department. 13th, it clarifies that a person may provide a qualifying patient who is 18 years of age or older with marijuana paraphernalia for the purpose of the qualifying patient's medical use of marijuana, notwithstanding the requirements of Title 22, Chapter 262A, which, among other provisions, requires licensure for certain tobacco retailers and prohibits the sale of tobacco products to a person who has not attained 21 years of age. And 14th, it directs the department's Office of Marijuana Policy to adopt rules to develop a graduated enforcement plan for violations of the Maine Medical Use of Marijuana Act or rules adopted under the Act, to develop requirements for a caregiver, dispensary, manufacturing facility, or marijuana testing facility in order that harvested marijuana or marijuana products can be traced in the event of a product recall, and to define and clarify certain terms. Also, this bill is an emergency. It requires a 2/3 vote of the House and the Senate to be passed and is effective immediately upon enactment. We received a number of either proposed amendments or requests for clarification during the public hearings. They're listed here. This was the one that was, I think, formally introduced by the Secretary of State. We had some requests for clarification from OMP, and then a number of people at the public hearing proposed the inclusion of a label stating that if a product has not been tested. I won't go through each of these in depth unless the committee would like me to. It sounds like the department may have worked with stakeholders and there might be an update that's coming. So
Yeah.
I am going to go through some issues for consideration for the committee, though, because I think these are things that when you make your decision about how you want to move forward, you want to keep in mind.
Thank you.
So the first is about grant funding to the Department of Health and Human Services regarding sale of tobacco products. So the current restriction in Title 22 against selling tobacco products to persons under 21 years of age stems from requirement by the federal government that may affect the state's eligibility for federal grant funding. I provided a link both to the Maine Revised Statutes provision and the federal grant funding statute here. And you can access the relevant federal block grant applications at this link. I haven't had a chance to go through them and really digest what's in each of the applications, but I have reached out to the department about whether this would impact the state's eligibility for federal block grants it currently receives, and if so, how much funding might be impacted. And I haven't heard back yet, but I wanted to flag this for the committee. Regarding telehealth, so this bill and 1948 creates specific references to Maine's licensing statutes for each type of medical provider allowed to certify patients to use medical use marijuana under the program. And then telehealth encounters are something that already actually occurs with regard to certifying patients for the use of medical marijuana. And I guess if the committee intends to limit how telehealth encounters may occur, it probably would benefit to state so expressly. As stated by the department, the proposed medical program rule explicitly permits the use of telemedicine, subject to the requirements of the professional licenses of the providers. So regulating certifying providers is the purview of the Board of Medicine and is beyond the scope of what the department does in the program. But the reason I'm discussing this with the committee right now is I was reached out to by the AAGs for the Professional and Financial Regulation Division. And there was some concern expressed about the way the language in the bill currently addresses the practice of telehealth within the program. Specifically, since the bill directly addresses certain medical providers licensed within the state and the type of telehealth encounters those providers may engage in for the purpose of certifying patients under the program, there was concern that the language could be read to limit the authority of the licensing boards to regulate the practice of those medical providers when it comes to telehealth for the purpose of certifying patients under the medical use program. So one potential consequence of this could be that certain medical providers in certain situations try to argue that they don't have to follow the general standards of practice as determined by their respective licensing boards. This issue could be addressed with some language that I've suggested or something similar to what I've put down here, either saying nothing in this section prohibits the authority of their licensing boards to regulate their respective medical providers, or, and this might even be better, but I haven't had a chance to really work through the drafting yet. You could say something like, in accordance with the standards of practice determined by their respective licensing boards, medical providers may utilize telehealth for the purpose of certifying patients under this section. And this is actually relevant to something that was also brought up during the public hearing about asynchronous encounters, where some expressed concern that the potential for asynchronous encounters could be used to certify patients under the program, and specifically the potential that a person could simply become certified by filling out an online form or sending an email. This is a good example of where the committee may want to consider the impacts of creating specific types of authorization. So if the licensing board, and if the licensing boards for medical providers do not allow for a diagnosis to occur without an actual face-to-face examination, virtual or in person, between a doctor and a patient, it could create a conflict for providers between the authority of their medical license and the allowable practices within the program. But this is why I was thinking that if you were to say something like, in accordance with the standards of the practice determined by their respective licensing boards, you may avoid a conflict like that. And it may also be the case that even if you were to say asynchronous encounters are allowed when certifying patients under the program, the licensing board standards of practice actually may not allow for for an email to simply be sent or a form to be filled out to get certified. They might actually require some sort of doctor-patient real-time interaction. I don't know, but these are just things to keep in mind, and I can provide more information on that or try to explain it again if I wasn't clear. And then just one more telehealth note here. So even though telehealth is currently permitted by medical practice and addressed in the department's proposed rule, it may still be beneficial to provide clear authorization in the medical marijuana statute. Doing so would ensure there is no doubt about whether a patient certified for medical use obtained a certification in a way that's explicitly allowed under the program. And the reason that explicit authorization is an important note is that currently there are still crimes for marijuana use and trafficking in Title 17A. And there's a specific carve out for both the adult use and the medical use program in those crimes. So if you're participating in authorized activity under those programs, there's an explicit carve out in the criminal code for that. And so that's why it's often really good to err on the side of explicit authorization in these programs, because it makes very clear whether someone is inside or outside the scope of the program.
Thank you, Sam. Are there any questions to date? I just, up until now from the committee on these, on the bill analysis? Seeing no hands. So Sam, I'm gonna ask you to skip the Administrative Procedure Act and mining provision section of this, because this will return in LD 1784 when we take that up later as a standalone bill.
Okay.
So yeah, so we can just skip through this part of this bill analysis. Thank you.
Absolutely. And there will also be portions of this that I'm going to skip when I do the 1948 bill analysis, because they are the same. And I apologize also for providing the committee with such lengthy information. I just want to make sure that these things are something that you are aware of when considering these bills.
We enjoy thorough bill analyses in this committee, so thank you very much.
So I have a note here about metric. So Section 23 of the bill states that the department may not require a registered caregiver, registered dispensary, marijuana testing facility, or manufacturing facility to use a particular electronic system for tracking marijuana plants and harvested marijuana. So while this prohibition would prevent the department from requiring the use of the current electronic tracking system, which is metric, it would also prevent the department from requiring the use of any centralized electronic tracking system. And so I think that was an important kind of clarification for the committee to be aware of, because I didn't think that was clear from all of the testimony, the public hearing. But I also wanted to note that the language in the bill also does not prevent the department from making a particular system available for the use of registrants within the program, even if it's not required. And it further does not require that the department make more than one system available. And further, it doesn't specify how or if program registrants would be required to track and report to the department. So I wanted to point this out because as I see the language, it doesn't prevent the department from, for example, creating an electronic system or contracting for an electronic system that registrants may use. It just prevents them from requiring one, a specific one. And this is also a good time where if you are curious about what the statute says about electronic tracking, I would point you back to that bill analysis companion document that I put together for you. And you have the current statutory sections right there. A few technical notes and issues that I also wanted to flag. Section 9 of the bill provides additional details about enforcement and violations, and it requires a graduated enforcement plan for violations of the chapter and rules, and requires that enforcement is proportional to the seriousness of the violation and reasonable in comparison to similar violations in other industries, and includes warning, plans of correction, fines, and suspensions and revocations of registry identification cards or registry certificates. However, this section, I think, still lacks a level of detail that provides real clarity about what that schedule of, I said fins, I meant fines, what that schedule of fines might be, which industries are actually similar, and what kind of enforcement is reasonable. These will be major substantive rules per the bill. So the committee would get to review them once they come back to the legislature. But I do just want to note that those are still points where I feel like the bill doesn't provide you with clear expectations about what you're going to receive. In section 11 of the bill allows assistance of caregivers to have a registry identification card provisionally granted if the department doesn't respond within 14 days of submission. And as drafted, this provision seems only to apply to assistance of caregivers and not other assistants, such as the assistant of a registered dispensary. And if assistants of a registered dispensary or others are meant to be included, I think that would just need to be clarified by stating so in that section. And that is something that is stated in other sections of the law. I don't know if this was intentional or an oversight, but I wanted to point it out. Section 12 amends the registration requirements for cards issued to dispensaries, but says nothing about an assistant of a caregiver, even though the other relevant sections do. This bill is amending this section to remove assistants and move their cards to another section. And it appears that the changes assume this applies to assistants of caregivers. However, it's not clear. So I think, like I said for the one before, if caregivers are to be included in the change, they should be included in the language. And then section 20 of the bill, I excerpted here because it was easier to excerpt it than explain, but you can see this is the new section being enacted that prohibits testing to be required until the legislature approves a testing standard that is reliable, consistent, and science-based and provides useful information to qualifying patients or medical providers. I have two questions that I think are important kind of for the functionality of this section, which is the first is, what does legislative approval look like? Is this the adoption of a law, or is this approval through major substantive rule? I think this is an easy clarification that just should be in there so it's clear moving forward. And then the second is, who makes the determination that the standards are reliable, consistent, science-based, and provide useful information? This is probably, the answer to this is probably dependent on what the answer to the first question looks like. But sometimes we will say, you know, as determined by the department. I think in this case, if you're looking at legislative approval, it'll probably be as determined when the legislature approves the standards through whatever means they are actually doing the approval. And then just two more things when it comes to technical issues. So this is section 25 of the bill. This is the unallocated language. And I caught this right in the beginning, and I think the section should read, so the section currently reads that no later than January 1st, 2023, the department shall adopt rules, and then continues to clarify that these are still major substantive rules. And I think that probably what it should read is shall provisionally adopt rules. And that is because if you direct the department to adopt rules, it's not clear if those are finally adopted rules, provisionally adopted rules, and you may risk, I think it could create a lack of clarity that may risk the committee not actually getting to review the major substantive rules that they are being told are supposed to come back through this bill. So provisionally adopted is the way we identify rules that are adopted provisionally and then submitted to the legislature for review. Then finally, the third and second subsections of the unallocated language just require the department to define and use certain terms in its rules that the bill itself doesn't define within the context of Title 22, Chapter 558C. And because this section is a one-time directive, it does not guarantee that the department will define the terms in the ways described by the directive in any instance of future rulemaking. So if the committee wants to make sure that certain terms are defined within its rules, it should put that requirement in allocated sections. And when you go and look at the bill, you'll see that the terms in the second and third subsections of this bill are included in 1948 in actual statutory language that's before the committee today. So I don't really have more analysis on this particular bill before I move forward, but I will just I also excerpted the economic impact analysis sections of the Maine Administrative Procedure Act statute and provided links to the full sections as well for the committee today. I know that there was some discussion about those analyses and when they're required, and I tried to pull, as you can see, every single section that refers to that, so you could have it right in front of you. I know that was a lot. I will stop again to see if there are any questions before I move to 1948.
Thank you, Sam. Are there any questions from the committee? I know there is a lot here, and as we discussed up front, we're going to hear from the stakeholders and the department about their ideas for a way forward. So unless there's something pressing, we can move on. Thank you, Sam.
All right, so moving on to 1948. And as I mentioned before, to the extent this bill overlaps with the other one, I'm not going to reread those sections because I provided basically the same information about telehealth in this analysis as the past one. So this bill actually makes changes to both the medical use and the adult use program, although the adult use program change is pretty minor, but I will point it out. So first, in regard to the medical use of marijuana act, this bill defines the terms batch number, marijuana tincture, packing slip, telehealth services, and amends the definition of medical provider. It also establishes requirements for the inclusion of batch numbers on the packaging or container or on a packing slip for retail and wholesale transactions of harvested marijuana. Third, it amends the requirements for medical providers providing written certification to qualifying patients who are minors, including by imposing a requirement for medical providers to be available after hours for questions about a minor patient's use of medical marijuana. Fourth, it authorizes the use of telehealth services for medical providers to meet with patients seeking a written certification for the medical use of marijuana. Fifth, it adds naturopathic doctors to the list of medical providers that may issue written certifications and clarifies that medical providers who issue written certifications must be licensed in Maine. And sixth, it requires the department to publish on its website a monthly report on sales data, as well as a breakdown of revenues generated by registered caregivers and dispensaries. In terms of the Adult Use Act, it really makes only two changes. The first is it defines the term marijuana tincture. And the second is it also requires the department to publish on its website a monthly report on retail sales data. So this is a sales data reporting requirement that's meant to mirror the provisions that are affecting the medical program in the bill. And the bill is an emergency, again, requiring a 2/3 vote of the House and Senate to be passed and effective immediately upon enactment. Provided a link to the current section of the law dealing with the certification of a minor qualifying patient. When you look at the bill, you'll see that there's it rewrites that section a little bit and strikes quite a few pieces. So I wanted the committee to have a quick access to what it currently looks like, and you can compare that to what you see in the bill. These are, again, I flagged some areas where amendment might be considered, and these were flagged by those testifying at the public hearing. Like I said, these weren't necessarily formal amendments that were introduced, but they were just things that I caught while taking notes at the public hearing. So there was a lot of discussion about what types of telehealth encounters might be permitted in the bill. And I know that there was some concern about asynchronous encounters. So again, here they're just what the definitions of synchronous versus asynchronous encounters are. There were some suggestions made about the batch number provisions in the bill, which are right here. There were suggestions made about the sales report, about reporting the sales data. and the way the bill defines and talks about that sales data. That is also a provision that's in LD 1928. And in 1928, it talks about, I think, sales tax data versus the way it's characterized in this bill. And again, I mentioned the sales tax data thing already, got ahead of myself. Again, this bill raises the same kind of telehealth issues as the ones in 1928. I won't go through it again. I made some notes here about defining batch and batch number. So this bill creates a definition of batch number under the medical use program that is different from the definition that currently exists in the adult use program. And so while the programs themselves are separate, it may be confusing from an administrative perspective to have two different statutory definitions of batch number under the jurisdiction of the same department. The term batch number, I think, could be written to be the same in both programs, and you could include a separate provision in the medical use program to ensure the specificity of use envisioned by this bill. And I think also that the term batch is defined in the other program and should probably also have be defined in this one just for the purpose of clarity. This next piece is really just a question. The bill talks about batch numbers and what looks like tracking for the purpose of wholesale transactions, but they talk about the inclusion of packing slips, which to me sounds a little bit like a manifest that we discussed in the adult use bills. And I guess I just wasn't really sure in the bill if this provision was trying to achieve something similar to what was we talked about last week in the adult use program. So for instance, if there's concern about whether tags or labels are required on individual items at wholesale, that would have to, if that's something that's intended here, that's something that should be clarified. And I just wasn't clear looking at the bill. Here, I provided you with batch number as defined in the bill, and then batch and batch number as currently defined in the adult use program. So you had it right in front of you. And then the last note on this bill was that the department had expressed concerns at the public hearing about its ability to collect and analyze the data it is directed to collect and analyze in this bill without the use of a centralized inventory tracking system. I don't have further information on that. If that may be something they can speak to, but it seemed like something worth noting to ensure that the bill is actually doing what you hope it does. And with that, I will stop talking.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sam, very much for your thorough analysis. Are there any questions from the committee before I invite Susan Meehan and Director Gunderson to present on the documents that they have provided to our committee and the work that they are also doing together? Seeing none, I will ask Susan Meehan to introduce herself. Director Gunderson, I'm going to also ask you to turn on your camera and introduce yourself. And I just I'll have a few questions for each of you, and we'll go from there. Good morning, Susan Meehan, and good morning, Director Gunderson. Both of you can introduce yourselves right off the top, and we'll go from there.
Good morning, I'm Susan Meehan. I'm a caregiver and a patient in the program. I am the chairperson of the Maine Cannabis Coalition, and I also serve on the Cannabis Council of Maine. That is a group working with all of the major advocacy groups in the state of Maine. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, Director.
Good morning, everybody. Eric Gunderson, Director of the Office of Marijuana Policy.
So we'll start with the shorter document that we have as a summary of a meeting that Susan Meehan had with the department dated February 11th. It's divided into a couple of sections. It says statute issues that are either, statute issues we all agree can be addressed as emergency bill topics as soon as possible. And then statute issues that are either too complex or do not warrant an emergency status. And then statute issues to which we do not agree on a solution. So I'll first just ask each of you to talk about briefly the statute issues that you agree can be addressed as emergency bill topics as soon as possible, because the committee will certainly consider that as you guys work out the details with the analyst about what should be and an amendment to the bill. So I will start with Susan Meehan.
Thank you. The second bullet on this, the fixing the pediatric certification process. I know it looks like we're crossing out a whole lot of law, and we are, but right now the statute does not reflect the actual practice here in Maine. And we all agree that it's important and imperative that the statute and what we're doing to certify pediatric patients is in alignment and speaks the truth, so to speak. So that's my first comment on the document.
Susan, can you hold on 1 second? Susan, please defer 1 second. Sam, you have this document, correct? Sam?
That is correct.
Can you please put it up on the screen so that everyone can see what we are talking about? Thank you.
Absolutely. Let me just find it. It's not where I expected it to be on my desktop.
Sorry, Susan, I should have done this to start with, but here we are.
Give me a moment while I track it down. I do in fact have it.
Well, you did send it to us, so I know that you have it somewhere.
That's why I'm confused about not being able to find it. Here it is. So, and then, okay.
Great.
Can everyone see this? This is the correct document, right?
Yes, it is.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Susan, you may continue.
Okay, I don't think I need to explain number one. It's just something that we haven't referred to always encompassed dispensaries when we're talking about statute changes. And it's as we include more caregivers converting over to dispensary license, number one is critical. Number two, like I said, the statute is not how it's actually happening. And I think it's important that practice matches statute and vice versa, that we're following our own laws. So this would bring us into following our own laws. The synchronous versus asynchronous, Representative Hymanson had proposed at the hearing when her testimony that we consider that all telemedicine appointments for pediatric patients must be synchronous. We are in agreement with that. We weren't looking for someone to be able to email a provider and get a card. We would like a synchronous appointment, a live interaction, whether it's on phone or a digital platform as mentioned. Number three isn't in any of these bills. It has been entertained in the past, but it's kind of a glitch in the program, like to allow a caregiver to ban a caregiver from selling plants to their patients is just nonsensical. We often find a particular strain, a patient may find a particular strain that actually works for them, and it's imperative that that strain gets spread to more than one garden in case there's a crisis. This did happen with my daughter, Cindy May, in 2015 when we lost a particular strain that was imperative to her care. It's just crazy to have caregivers growing plants specifically for a patient and not be able to sell the strains that work for them to them or to another caregiver to ensure its longevity. The single card system is long overdue, and I think it will alleviate, according to OMP, it will alleviate some of the delays that they're currently experiencing, because issuing an assistant card every time an assistant moves from one caregiver to another requires reissuing a card. So they're reissuing thousands of cards on an annual basis, even on a monthly basis. I think they could do better at a more expeditious process if we can make this a one card system. We're all in agreement on that. And 2430E is something we talked about in the OMP office, and the only part of that we really need is the moisture content of marijuana. The weight is calculated on wet marijuana at 75% instead of the full weight counting the water. But the rest of that, no one in the history of the program, to our knowledge, has ever turned in their excess marijuana. And I don't believe they're running to their police stations today with it. Number 6 is increasing the caregiver maximum plan count. It was a bill entertained in the last legislative session, and it was tabled. We agree that that gives a middle of the road solution from top level caregiver currently at 30 flowering plants, moving it to 60 flowering plants. It gives a a tier in between caregiver and applying for a $5,000 dispensary license. So it kind of gives the middle-sized businesses that are trying to breach from small business into a little bit larger, some middle ground to stand on. The other thing in the bill that I forgot to put on this list that OMP and I agreed with is the tincture definition. And we do agree that it is critical that we fix it, but I had a proposed change to the definition included in 1948. And I think that it should end at edible, and it should say medium or edible liquid, because a solvent can be misconstrued. Like when you say solvent to me as a processor, I think of alcohol, ethanol, butane, etc. And while you might make a tincture in ethanol, perhaps, and hopefully not for a pediatric patient, but you might make it in ethanol, but you certainly wouldn't want to make a tincture in butane, which is another solvent. So medium or liquid would be a better term there. And I also don't like the comprehensive list. I know it's my own language, but edible oils, alcohol, etc. No matter how many we list, somebody's going to come up with another one. So I think liquid or medium is a better word, and deleting that last sentence if we're considering passing this. And OMP and I also discussed, as far as tincture goes, is whether or not to consider it a food product. Currently, DACF does not issue a kitchen license if you intend to only make tinctures. They don't consider it a food product. That's not exactly what they said, but they don't license a kitchen if they're just producing tinctures and pills, actually. So I think that has to be clarified. And OMP and I thought about maybe adding a sentence, tincture is not considered a food product, but I struggle with that because, I mean, you eat it by mouth. So I leave it to you. And I think that's all I have on this first list. If we'd like to let Director Gunderson maybe.
I see his hand is raised, and so I wanted to just have you walk through this first page. That seems to be some consensus around that. And so, but before I turn to Director Gunderson, I see that Representative Corey has a question.
Yes.
Representative Corey.
Yes, I had a question about, the increase of plant count and sort of like that middle. And I've always been kind of interested in this kind of like in a tiering way, not just increasing sort of plant count. You had talked about how it would be kind of a stepping off between being, a 30 plant caregiver and a dispensary. Or would we actually be talking about sort of a separate caregiver card for that, or would we just be moving up to 60 plants with everybody and then they decide if they want to be there or not? I wasn't clear based on that sentence.
Go ahead, Susan. You may respond.
I'm not sure, actually. I think it would just be another caregiver tier. However, my concern with it is this, and it may not be a popular opinion, but when these numbers were designed, they were very specifically designed at the top level of caregiver at 30 plants and 60 plants, which is theoretically 90 plants. Once you get into 99 plants or more, you may need the protection of the dispensary license. 99, at least when the program was written this way, 99 plants was the criteria, and the federal government could intervene and say, that's too many plants and this is a federal matter now and not a state matter. That is what was thought when these numbers were developed. So I'm a little concerned that we go into an area where we put a caregiver who's not a licensed dispensary and has different protections of law as a dispensary, and we put them in jeopardy with 60 plants plus 120 plants, putting them way over the 99 federal issues. So that's my concern with number 6.
Yeah, I think that when I was looking at this last year, I was thinking that, sort of regulation should be scalable. That's how we've been, sort of talking about a lot of this stuff all along, like the reason why, caregivers, didn't necessarily, or, shouldn't necessarily have to follow the same types of rules, is what's happening in the adult use market and everything, and I think that a lot of the discussion around that is that, well, there's no economy of scale. Do you know what I mean? When you expect, a caregiver to be tracking things the exact same way and have all the cameras and have all of that other stuff. Well, a lot of that's based on, being very small, operations. But, if you end up with, a couple who decides to go into business maybe with another couple, right? And then, all of a sudden, you start to talk about, or even if you've got two couples together in business and, you're moving from 60 plants to now 120 plants, that's not only sort of about your concern, but that's a fairly big operation then, especially if we do canopy space, which is allowed in the market right now. People can have up to 500 square feet. Now all of a sudden, we could be talking about like a 2,000 square foot grow, which would be a pretty substantial operation.
Thank you, Representative. I would like for Director Gunderson to respond to the first page of the document Susan Meehan has shared with us and add anything he'd like also from the very thorough document that he also provided to us, which if we need you to refer to it, sir, we will have Sam put that up on the screen as well. And again, I don't want to get too granular in this conversation because we know that whatever comes out of this consensus won't be decided today. The intent is to dispense with 2 of these 3 bills and table the 3rd so that all of these details can be worked out between now with the analyst and the next time we take the bill up. Director Gunderson, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. So certainly we appreciate the time that we had spent with Susan, the thoughtful conversation we have, the agreement as far as a pathway forward. But I feel like I need to be crystal clear with this committee at this point. Number 6, there was no agreement. We actually voiced our concerns with that proposal and shared our thoughts about how to fundamentally change the registration process to get at exactly what Representative Corey is talking about. It even goes as far as the document that we were sent didn't include number 6. So I just want to be crystal clear that the office and the agency in no way support number 6. Having said that, 1 through 5, where the agreement was and the documentation that we were sent, we certainly do. And we spent a number of hours with Susan and talking with others on Friday to come to agreement on this. I think these are the highest of priorities. I also think the second page, as far as too complex, we did have an agreement that a lot of those and a lot of the documents, a lot of the issues on the other document that we sent, which is not a short document, are certainly things that we can work through more structural changes before we continue to add on more conflict, more unclarity to start heading in the right direction, really. The only thing that I would flag, and I don't know if we talked about this with Susan or not, but I don't know if she would be amicable to it or not, but for allowing caregivers to sell plants, certainly we're restricted in statute for that to be only storefronts, and we agree that caregivers should also have that authority to sell those plants. We would just make it clear the agency's position would be not mature plants, but certainly seedlings and immature plants could be sold. And I'm hoping with the nodding that Susan agrees with that. So completely in support of this document. I think as far as the priorities we have, hoping that's something that we can act on this year and start getting that much needed clarity. And then having OMP and Susan and her group kind of work through some of the more, certainly more complex and structural changes that are needed. It's certainly a work in progress, but yeah, agree with it. Thank you, Susan, for the time that you spent with us. And just again, the department certainly is not supportive of number 6.
Thank you for all of that clarity, Director. Are there any questions for Director Gunderson from the committee? So on page 2 of this document, Sam, if you could scroll up, Director, I just have a question about, I know that there is a lot on here that says this is too complex to deal with in this session, but my question is number 5, and this is for both you and Susan, is there some way to try to put some baseline into an amendment to one of the vehicles we have in front of us on 5 before we end our session? Yes or no? Director Gunderson, you first.
Yeah, so I'm off mute. Yeah, so we've had this conversation in numerous sessions, although I think it was in front of a different committee about the progressive enforcement that's currently in our rule, and even this proposal, as far as really the only administrative tools that we have are revocation and suspension, which make it difficult for that progressive enforcement. But as Deputy Director Malik has talked to this committee about before, we really have that approach where we're offering technical assistance and trying to be a resource to those individuals to get into compliance and use the only administrative tool that we have sparingly. So again, I wouldn't want to come forward with a proposal about holds or what a fine structure would look like without having the opportunity to engage with those stakeholders, because I know we've put 2 different proposals in front of the legislature in the past, and there just wasn't an agreement there. So that would be something that I would welcome the opportunity to work with Susan and her team and others of getting a more concrete proposal.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And Susan, would you agree?
Yes, I agree that it would have to be a team effort. We could expedite that if the legislature requested that we do that. I'm sure that I could make time, and that a couple of members of the Cannabis Council could also make time if Director Gunderson wanted to, but I do feel that we don't have a current list that we're in agreement on, as Director Gunderson said.
Thank you. And Director Gunderson, I know that, like you said, your document, your spreadsheet is very detailed and very long. Did you just want to tell the committee and the audience listening sort of what you did, why you did it, and how it will help formulate some amendments to statute going forward that need to be done? And Sam, if you could stop sharing your screen, please, that would be great. And if you could find the document that the director sent to us, you don't have to put it up just yet unless the director asks us to put up something in particular, but I just wanted to hear from the department about that document. Thank you, Director.
Yeah, this was the document that we had talked about preparing for the committee the last time we were together. Really just an opportunity to put into writing kind of the tough spot, I guess, that the agency or the state has been put in trying to put together rules and get a program that works for all of our stakeholders. You've heard me say it once, you've heard me say it 1,000 times, that we really want all stakeholders to be able to feel like this is a program that works for them in their best interests. So we went through and listed the relevant statutory text for basically each line item and the issue raised by that statutory language. And as you go through that document, they really fall into 3 buckets here. One where the department needs simply more clarity as far as what the legislative intent is, so we can feel more confident in moving forward with whatever the program rule would look like around that statutory language. Second, we go through and identify numerous conflicts in law that make it challenging for us to put together a program rule where there's clarity shared by all parties moving forward. And then third, as we've gone through the rulemaking process for a 3rd or 4th time where we've collected public input, we feel like we're in the position of a lot of the time of saying, well, we can't make those changes because there's a statutory requirement, or we simply just copy and pasted the statute into the rule, and there's just a disconnect there. So we try to highlight those as well to show you the statutory language that we're operating off of, where there gets to be significant industry pushback, and we're kind of forced to saying, hey, we can't really do anything with it. That's the way that the program has been designed by the legislature and what the law is. And a lot of them, again, some of them is clarity. Some of them are potential changes that we can make. And I don't want to frame up the department whereas we would support all of those changes, but at least letting the legislature know kind of what we're operating with. And I think a lot of it would certainly come up in conversations again this summer to try to get at some of the fundamental shortcomings of the statute around the program to be able to move forward more united.
Thank you, Director. And Susan, would you agree with that?
Yes, that document, the spreadsheet that you're talking about, is basically what we use to kind of develop this what's a true emergency right now and what do we need, what can we deal with later? I agree with what Director Anderson said.
Thank you. Representative Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying to keep all my documents straight, and I'm not sure which document Director Gunderson was just referencing. Where can I find it? I'm sure it's here somewhere.
You did receive it in an email. Sam, can you just put it up on the screen so that folks get a sense of it's several pages. It's double-sided.
Absolutely.
And
who did it come from? Who did the email come from?
It was in the email with my bill analysis documents this morning, and it's titled OMP Medical Statutory Change Tracker for VLA, and it's a Word document.
I did see it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So the department director will work with the Cannabis Council as represented today by Susan Meehan, and Susan Meehan will work with committee members and the bill and Sam to bring to this committee a comprehensive amendment that deals with statutory language around everything on page 1 of Susan Meehan's report to the legislature, to this committee. Is that Director Gunderson?
Does that mean the legislative committee would accept amendment with number 6, where there is, again, to be clear, no agreement, and we have significant concerns around provision number 6 or line item number 6?
We will absolutely take what you bring to us that is consensus based and move forward. And if you can't come up with something there before the end of this session, the committee will deal with that. And if the committee wants to overrule that, we can certainly think about it. But for now, I would ask that you guys work on what you agree on so that we can have statutory language in an amendment that can be presented for one of the vehicles that we have in front of us. And the goal would be, we may revisit this again on Friday, February the 25th, which is 11 days away. And if we need more time, just let us know. But I want to make sure that at least we know we're moving in the right direction. Representative Wood, do you have a question or comment?
Oh, no.
I just received word from Senator Claxton that if in these conversations, the bulk of 1948 that the department and the council agrees with can be moved into 1928, he is willing to have his bill be dispensed with today for our work as a committee. So I just wanted to put that out there. He is in Labor and Housing right now testifying on another bill. And so he's not here to tell us that. Representative Hymanson is here and would like to make a comment, and I'm going to allow her to do that before we entertain some motions on 2 of the 3 vehicles in front of us and before we open the work session on Senator Maxman's bill. So Representative Hymanson is being promoted. Representative Hyman, please introduce yourself.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Representative Patty Hymanson. I represent House District 4, which is parts of York, Wells, Sanford, and all of Ogunquit. And I've been involved with medical marijuana issues for the last 3 terms in my capacity in Health and Human Services as chair for 2 terms. And my current issues really are around pediatrics and kids and stopping a public health problem from occurring. So I really appreciate the asynchronous agreement about the pediatric population. But I did want to tell you that all asynchronous telemedicine cards would endanger children. And that is because when we dealt with this with the vaping issue, when you go onto a site and you agree to be part of the site for an asynchronous encounter, you'll get a pop-up window that you might all be aware of that says, are you over 18? And all you need to do is check the box and then you're let into the site. And there is no accountability for whether or not you're 18 or under. So So if you allow asynchronous encounters, that is what will happen. And it will give kids the ability to go onto a site and check that box. So just to show you what I've seen, this is a picture of a last week in the York, in the Weekly Sentinel, which is free to all of us. This advertisement came through, free medical card. So I called the number, and this is a good example of a synchronous encounter. I have to say that it's terrific. I called the number, I got an email back, and they said, for telemedicine, we will text you a link so that the provider can see you by camera. Fantastic, synchronous encounter. Tomorrow at 11:30, it was a real person making an appointment. We can leave your card out at the address in a lockbox, or we can mail it to you. And then I told them that I found my way forward and I was okay with that. And they said, hopefully you'll not pay more than $19.99. Wish you the best. And I said, thank you. So that was an example of a good telemedicine encounter, synchronous. But if it were asynchronous, then I would have gotten a message that said, here's the website, come on, check the box that you're under 18, and then it would go forward. You'd probably have to upload some forms to them, and they would look at it, review it, and then they would get it back to you in an asynchronous way, meaning you would never look at them, they'd never look at you, you'd never talk to them directly. So I wanted you to be aware that any asynchronous encounter can be used by children under 18 to get a medical card.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Mirma.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll save my question. Thank you.
Okay, great. And I do believe that the proposals that Susan Meehan will be working on with the department will ensure that all pediatric encounters are synchronous. Is that correct, as I understand it? Did we get the language right around that?
What I will say is that that means pediatric encounters. So that's people who identify as being pediatric. But if a child who's 17 goes on an asynchronous website, checks the box that they're over 18, there will be no way for anyone to tell if they are 18 or over.
Okay. Understood.
Okay.
Susan Meehan, did you want to comment on
That's a
it?
very good point. Yes, Representative Hymanson, that's an excellent point. And OMP and I on Friday discussed whether or not we should consider all telemedicine appointments in the program require them to be synchronous. And I am not opposed to that, especially after Representative Hymanson's explanation. I have no doubt that my 13-year-old niece could acquire herself a card and upload the proper documents and say she was the adult acting on behalf of herself. So I agree with Representative Hymanson's proposal.
Thank you, Representative McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know the answer to this, and maybe Representative Hymanson does or someone else. Is anyone doing asynchronous? Because all the problems that you mentioned are there for I would say for anything. So I see in the Susan Meehan's note that we're not sure if anybody's using asynchronous. I'm hoping we're not, but I'm
can
asking.
certainly get that information for the next work session on the vehicle that we choose to keep alive, or it's beginning to sound like will be LD 1928. So unless anyone has any other comments or questions about today's process, we've got 3 bills that we are open in work session on: LD 421, LD 1928, and LD 1948. And like I said, we have permission from Senator Claxton to dispense with his bill, should we decide to do that. And we also have permission from Representative Collins to dispense with his bill if we have permission from this committee to do that, so that we can put everything into LD 1928 moving forward. With that, I entertain a motion on LD 421. An act to increase the number of plants and medical marijuana caregiver may cultivate. Senator Farren.
Make a motion of ought not to pass.
On LD 421, the motion is ought not to pass from Senator Farren. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Representative Dolov. Senator Mearmont, do you have a comment on the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had discussion about increasing the number of plants, but we didn't go anywhere with that, but we have that option. I'm sorry, I'm talking, if we kill both 1948 and 421, where are we going to fit that in? We're just going to plug it into one of the others that we keep?
If there is consensus this session on what to do with plant count increases, whether it's for the whole plant, all of the plants, or the immature plants, or the flowering plants, it will go into LD 1928 as part of the consensus stakeholder group and the department. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other comments about the motion? Is committee ready for the question? Darlene, please call the roll. LD 421.
All right, Senator Hickman,
Yay.
Senator Mearmont,
Yay.
Senator Farren,
Yes.
Representative Ciazzo,
Yes.
Representative McCrae,
Yes.
Representative Riley,
Yes.
Representative Supika,
Yes.
Representative Wood,
Yes.
Representative Kinney,
Yes.
Representative Harrington is absent, Representative Corey,
Yes.
and Representative Dolov.
Yes.
11 in the affirmative, and 1 absent.
Thank you, Darlene. 11 members having voted in the affirmative and none in the negative. The motion prevails. LD 421 is ought not to pass. I will close the work session on that bill. I will entertain a motion on LD 1948, an act to enhance access to education regarding a patient and community safety in Maine's marijuana programs. Senator Farren.
I'll make a motion of ought not to pass on LD 1948.
It's been moved on not to pass. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Representative Kinney. Any questions, comments from the committee, discussion of the motion? Seeing none, Darlene, please call the roll. Whenever you're
Senator
ready.
Hickman,
Yay.
Senator Mearmont,
Yay.
Senator Farren,
Yes.
Representative Ciazzo,
Yes.
Representative McCrae,
Yes.
Representative Riley,
Yes.
Representative Supika,
Yes.
Representative Wood,
Yes.
Representative Kinney,
Yes.
and Representative Harrington is absent, Representative Corey,
Yes.
and Representative Dolph.
Yes.
11 in the affirmative, 1 absent.
Thank you. 11 members voting in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion prevails. LD 1948 will be dispensed with. I'll close the work session on that. And the chair will entertain a motion on LD 1928, an act to update and clarify the Maine Medical Use of Marijuana Act and provide for greater transparency. Senator Farren.
Make a motion to table LD 1928.
It's been moved to
Second.
table. It's been seconded by Representative Wiley. No discussion allowed. Darlene, please call the roll.
Senator Hickman,
Yay.
Senator Mearmont,
Yay.
Senator Farren,
Yay.
Representative Ciazzo.
Yes.
Representative McCrae,
Yes.
Representative Riley,
Yes.
Representative Supika,
Yes.
Representative Wood,
Yes.
Representative Kinney,
Yay.
Representative Harrington is absent, Representative Corey,
Yes.
and Representative Dolph.
Yes.
11 in the affirmative and 1 absent.
With a unanimous vote of those present, the motion prevails. LD 1928 will be tabled until later in our committee work this session. And with that, I'll close the work session on LD 1928. Thank you all for your expeditious votes. I will now open. I do believe that Senator Maximum is with us. I'm going to open the work session on LD 1784, an act to ensure legislative review of rules for Maine's medical use of marijuana act, sponsored by Senator Maxman. Sam, the floor is yours again.
Thank you, Senator Hickman, and I promise this is not as long as the previous ones. So this is LD 1784, an act to ensure legislative review of rules for Maine's medical use of marijuana act. This bill does as the title says. It requires that, notwithstanding the Maine revised statutes, Title V, Section 8072, subsection 11, or any other provision of law to the contrary, major substantive rules that are provisionally adopted by the department relating to the Maine Medical Use of Marijuana Act and submitted for legislative review may not finally be adopted by the department unless legislation authorizing final adoption of those rules is enacted into law. This bill specifically amends the department's general authority for rulemaking under Title 22, Chapter 558C, but applies to all major substantive rules within the department's authority under the chapter by utilizing the language notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary. So just pausing here for a second, you'll notice when you look through the medical program, there are a number of places where the department is directed to create major substantive rules. And the language in this bill is specifically saying in every instance where the department's required to submit major substantive rules for review, that this requirement is now going to apply, that the legislature actually has to affirmatively approve the rules by legislation. And again, this bill is an emergency, requiring a 2/3 vote of the House and Senate to be passed and effective immediately upon enactment. I provided for the committee here just links and excerpts from the 2 general rulemaking provisions within Title 22 about the department's authority. These are separate sections and subsections, but they're both amended by the bill. And then I also provided the committee a link to the Maine Administrative Procedure Act section that's being not withstood by the bill. As previously noted, I think there was an amendment introduced by the Secretary of State and I believe endorsed by the sponsor at the public hearing. That language is here. And I have included here, and I will walk you through it because it seems minor and technical, but it is something that I want the concerns here are something I want the committee to be aware of when deciding how you go about addressing this based on some of the conversations that happened at the public hearing. So this is about the Maine Administrative Procedure Act. And the language in this bill is based off the language contained in Title 38, Chapter 3, Section 490 NN, regarding major substantive rules for metallic mineral mining. And just like the bill before the committee, that section notwithstands this portion of Title V or any other provision of law to the contrary, in order to require that rules provisionally adopted by the department and submitted to the legislature for review may not be finally adopted by the department unless the legislation authorizing the final adoption of those rules is enacted into law. So that is the only other place I'm aware of where we have a provision like this. And this bill, like the mining provision, creates what is effectively an exception to the standard Maine Administrative Procedure Act process for a specific set of rules. But it does not change the Maine Administrative Procedure Act itself. This is why we use the language notwithstanding. And the distinction is important for a few reasons. So first, creating a notwithstanding provision in regard to a single set of rules has clear implications. It creates an exception to the MAPA process, and it's not changing the MAPA process itself. And because the Maine Administrative Procedure Act applies broadly across state agencies, any change to the greater process may have consequences that could be unforeseen without reviewing the entirety of the Maine revised statutes and looking at every other provision that grants rulemaking authority. So for instance, when it comes to that mining statute is a good example. So if we were to change the MAPA process as suggested in the proposed amendment, It would not make sense then to use the language notwithstanding. And the reason is because the proposed amendment would create basically an allowable provision in the NAPA process for statutes to make clear when legislative approval is required by the major substantive rule. So we wouldn't say notwithstanding because it is actually something that's explicitly allowed by the process. So if the committee so basically, what I'm suggesting here is that in considering the amendment provided above, the committee should decide which it would prefer to do. It could create an exception to NAPA for this specific set of rules, or it could change the NAPA process to be clear, that that exceptions, this kind of exception is allowed where stated. If the committee chooses to change the NAPA process, it should also consider amending the mining provision to remove the notwithstanding language, and consider directing, you could do this in unallocated language, consider directing the Secretary of State to review the Maine revised statutes for any other rulemaking authority that may be impacted by that change. My hunch is that probably no other section would be affected, just given how narrow this language is, but I can't say for certain. I mean, I just can't review the entirety of Maine revised statutes to know. So that's just something to keep in mind here. And then I guess the third is that whether the committee chooses to create an exception to MAPA or amend MAPA more broadly, will also impact how the bill before the committee is drafted. The notwithstanding provision in the bill applies not only to the MAPA provisions, but also to any other provision of law to the contrary. And as such, it applies to the, I read it to apply to the department's rulemaking authority across Chapter 558C without having to go and change every single instance of major substantive rulemaking authority. So this is why I pointed out the any other provision of law to the contrary in the beginning. We're using one section of law here in this bill to require that the legislature actually affirmatively approve by legislation major substantive rules, rather than follow the standard major substantive rule process where if the rules are submitted on time, the legislature fails to act, the department may adopt them. So I only note this here just so that you know how, what you decide to do will affect the way we draft the rules. And I don't know for certain, it may be the case that we'll have to go through every instance in Chapter 558C and make clear that this higher standard is being required if you go that direction.
Okay.
None of that really has to be like hashed out as long as I know which you're choosing to do.
Thank you, Sam. I'm going to ask you to stop right there. First, I see Chairman Chiazzo has a question, but the Senator Maximum is here as well. And I wanted to get the bill sponsor's thoughts on everything that you have put in front of us so far in this legislation. So let's see, Chairman Chiazzo, I guess you put your hand down, which is, oh no, it's not. Chairman Chiazzo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question for Sam. Is there, and MAP is a pretty broad statute, is there a committee of jurisdiction, so to speak, that kind of handles that specifically, or was this kind of something that all the committees feeding to is kind of an over broad reaching statute?
I believe, and I could be wrong, I believe the committee that has historically handled it is state and local government, but as you know, bill referencing is sometimes a political decision that we don't comment on whether something's appropriate in one place or another.
Thank you. Senator Maxman, thank you for being here today. Please introduce yourself. And Sam, you may want to put your screen back up when we get to it so that Senator Maxman can be explicit about her intent. Senator Maxman.
Thank you so much, Senator Hickman. My name is Chloe Maxman. I represent Senate District 13, which is all of Lincoln County, except for Dresden, plus Washington and Windsor. I really appreciate that analysis, Sam. The only comment I had is that I do want an exception to MAPPA, not a change to it. So that's the only comment that I had on what you presented so far.
And Senator Maxman, do you want the exception to apply to the entire 558C or just a particular part of 558C? I think that was the other question I needed to have answered as well.
I believe the entire thing, but if Alicia Melnick is in the waiting room, she would have the best answer to that question.
Okay, let us, thank you for that, Senator Maxman. I'm going to move Ms. Melnick into the panel to, if she is willing, to answer that question more directly. Good morning, Alicia Melnick. Please introduce yourself and help us get some clarity on the intent here.
Good morning. My name's Alicia. Oh, yeah, still morning. Good morning. My name's Alicia Melnick. I am a resident of Portland. I'm an attorney at Bernstein Shur, and I've been working with Senator Maxman on this bill on behalf of the Maine Craft Cannabis Association. I agree with Senator Maxman that the intent is not to fundamentally change the MAPPA, but to create an exception in the same way that the mining rule, with the mining rules for this. In terms of specifically what portions to create the exemption for, if you could ask the question again, I would really appreciate it. I'm sorry, I've been multitasking.
Would you like that to be a plenary exception for the entire 558C section of law, or would you like there to be this exception for only certain major substantive rules that are required by the provisions in 558C?
The entire 558C.
Great. And I have one more question since both of you are here. We have discussed amongst ourselves that there might be more willingness to support this bill if there is a sunset provision in the bill. And so I will ask either or both of you, if that is the case, how long do you think we need to have this provision in statute before we revisit it with the sunset provision?
Oops. Yeah, thank you, Senator. I'm open to that, and I think 5 years would be a good starting point.
Okay.
I too have floated this idea with the stakeholders, and I think the idea is that they really would like a little bit of breathing room with this legislative oversight, and I think a 5-year sunset would be they would be very open to that and appreciative of the consideration.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Are there any questions? Chairman Chiazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I want to make sure I understand. I think, or I thought the intention of this is a stopgap or a kind of a, I would say for lack of a better, maybe closing a loophole to make sure that the rules are adopted. How does doing a 5-year sunset give the caregivers a reprieve if we're going to just pass the rules anyway? To Ms. Melnick, sorry.
There is no prevention to do additional major rulemaking, and I think the concern is whether these this rulemaking process has now been started a few times and has not been able to get over the finish line. And this legislature has also had to abruptly adjourn, which was a new experience for most of us. So I think the combination of those factors really are the reasons why we would like the stopgap or the loophole closed. But it is an unusual exception, and we recognize that. And I think the goal would be over the next 5 years to really get the statute and the rule in line with each other, try to allow the markets to settle a little bit, give some breathing room to both the regulators and the regulated industry and the patients to not be wondering if a new rule change is going to be around the corner. And in that time, we would have some ability to hopefully get to a better place. I think the two options for those who are a little bit uneasy about this stopgap being kind of a permanent thing, there are two solutions to that. One is you all could pass this and a future legislature could repeal it at a time when you felt it was no longer necessary. or you could put a sunset provision on that you could potentially extend as a legislature if it did not appear as though things had gotten to the point where that full and entire legislative oversight was necessary.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
You may proceed.
Thank you. So I guess I'm sorry, Ms. Melick. So it sounds like in essence, what you're asking for is a 5-year reprieve from rulemaking. Is that correct?
Not at all. The rulemaking process will be able to still continue. The goal is to have an updated set of rules. I think that's what there's a real shared desire for that. The question is whether in the meanwhile, we can close that loophole so that if there were rules that were put forward that the legislature and stakeholders were not in agreement were the right way to go, that those would not be able to go into effect without the legislature affirmatively acting on those. So it isn't that we don't want rulemaking to happen and we don't want updated rules to happen. We just want to make sure that they're happening with legislative approval.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Corey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm personally good with a sunset provision in here. I think that I'm mostly good with it. And I don't think that Alicia sort of mentioned this, but it's still also new. OMP, is new. Really, they only kind of opened shop, 2 years ago, and have gone through these sort of very arduous, processes. And what we've done is we've made it so that any rulemaking is going to come before us anyways. This would just assure us that the rules that are created don't happen when we're not here to approve them. So I look at this as sort of very responsible. OMP is new, not having had experience with prohibition. I know we're talking about medical here, but OMP is a creation of what came out of the adult use program. They're new. We still need legislative oversight. I'm guessing back in the 30s we probably didn't have a massive government to sit around and write rules and everything else. So the idea that we would see how this works for the next 5 years, making sure that us as lawmakers are our oversight or our stamp is on these things in that time period. I'm okay with it. I think this is a pretty sort of pragmatic approach to finding our way into a good regulated industry. Thanks.
Representative McCray.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The questions before me were really helpful. I have the same question Representative Chiazzo brought up of how rules would happen, which we got some response to. I guess I like the sunset if we're going to do this, but 5 years sounds long to me, and I wonder if it sounds long to anybody else.
That is up for us to discuss. Chairman Chiazzo has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I would agree with Representative McCray. My concern is that, OMP is going to propose rules, but for whatever reason, if the legislature decides not to take them up for any specific reason, that means that there would be no rules. And I think we're kind of all in agreement that I think the purpose of the MAPA provision of saying that if they're provisionally adopted, if the legislature doesn't act, is a stopgap method to say if something like a pandemic happens or some extenuating circumstance and the legislature can't take it up, they become rules. And then we can always go back retro and address that legislatively in the past. So my concern would be, and I don't know if this is I'm not suggesting this is the intention on, I think there's an opportunity here for, in essence, for a possibility of a 5-year reprieve on rulemaking if the legislature doesn't act, and I would be very concerned about that. So 5 years seems like a long time to me. I probably couldn't go anything more than 2, maybe 3 years in order for me to support them. Even then, I think I'm still kind of on the fence. I'm not a huge fan of making an exception to MAPA for this one instance, because I think it opens us as a legislative body and as a committee to multiple requests for exceptions and then suddenly the MAPA doesn't really mean a whole lot. So I would have to consider that a little bit stronger for 3 years. That's a tough. That would probably be the only thing that would bring me over. 5 years, I think, is just too long for mine. I'd like to see maybe a year or two. I think that gives us time. We're going to get rules from. I think we're going to get proposals from OMP anyway, and I think we're all in agreement that those need to be passed. So I'm a little hesitant on that one. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say that for me, I don't know that we're necessarily all in agreement on a little bit of detail. I think that the takeaway I had from the public hearing on all of these bills is that there's a lot that we're being asked to approve of by approving the rules in an affirmative vote. So much that is in the major substantive rulemaking sections of 558C could conceivably just become a part of statute. And I think that that is where the legislature is flexing its most muscle, is to put policy provisions about how this program should look into statute. We have a very long document from the director about what needs to be cleared up in statute in order to allow for them to draft certain rules that make more sense. And I think that as the stakeholders, the dispensaries, the council work with the department over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years on those policy provisions that could come to the legislature for enactment, we may find ourselves, or the department may find itself needing to draft fewer rules because we are strengthening the program in the law. So I just want to be clear that we can also express our approval or disapproval of those things by putting them directly into statute. Senator Farron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is, I'm going to ask for just a little indulgence as I struggle through this whole thing a little bit, right? Is that I do believe that, you know, we have an industry that is looking for some guidance and also some flexing of what they haven't had a lot of these rules in place, and we're trying to find one box that fits all that doesn't exist, right? I mean, between the adult use piece and the medical marijuana that we're talking about now, the caregivers and the different sizes. And I think we're looking to protect some small businesses. I don't think sometimes, I was really glad on the previous bills that we talked about how the Office of Marijuana Policy and the stakeholders work together to bring some things, because I see some of that animosity back and forth sometimes. So it's good to see them working together on some of these things. And I think we can get there with these rules. I share some of the same concerns that some of my colleagues do about stepping into the middle of this, but I'm going to tell you, you know, this last summer I went through with the rulemaking on the dams on the Kennebec River, and we didn't have a seat at the table as the legislature. Some of that was going on, and sometimes I think that's our responsibility to do that. So I'm leaning towards with some more clarification, discussing to do this. But I do share, I think 5 years is too long. That kind of gives everybody off the hook, that they don't have to do the work to get there sooner, whether it's the rules or the legislative process. Not exactly sure what that magic piece is, but that's kind of just throwing out there where I'm at right at the moment.
Thanks, Senator. Representative Kinney, followed by Representative Corey, and then I'll go back to Sam to finish the analysis, because there's that small business piece in the analysis that was just made reference to by Senator Farron indirectly, but there it is. Representative Kinney, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm with my colleagues, several of my colleagues on that 5-year sunset. I'm concerned that is a bit long. Having been in the legislature for 8 years now, I've learned that the department, when medical was under DHHS, it seems like there wasn't a lot of rules. And so now we're really trying to give them all kinds of rules all at once, now that they're under our purview. And rules need to be put in place for this. And I will admit, when I had people coming to me about the adult use and wanting to support that referendum back in the day, I said, be careful, you might lose your medical program. And I'm afraid we might be going to that at some point. And that does concern me. I have always supported the medical side of it, as I have seen over the years when I worked in pharmacy, that this product does help patients significantly. And we know with Cindy's daughter, with what she went through over the years, and how this product helped her through her life. So I don't know if this makes sense to make it, instead of a 5-year sunset, if there's a way to put into statute a 2-year sunset, that if we don't extend it or we don't end it specifically, that it could extend another 2 to 3 years. Maybe if we don't do anything to the contrary, we either have to end it or it can have the option to extend. And that gives the legislature a chance to look at this again. Do we want to give them more time, or is it working? Is it not working? And I'm concerned, I'm trying to understand the language. Are they able to put in a provision if there was an emergency? So we have had the strange issue with the 129th getting shut down suddenly in March of 2020, and we didn't come back until the 130th was elected and sworn in. Is there a way that does this take away the department's ability to provisionally accept some of these rules for us to turn around and maybe rescind them when we come back into session for either a regular or a special session? Or does this not allow them to put anything in place, even provisionally? Because then I have some concerns, because if there is a concern in the industry, even within the industry, can the department still put something into place without our action temporarily under this?
Representative Kinney, are you asking in a state of an emergency or just generally?
Well, I mean, if, like, for example, this is a short session where our statutory adjournment is in April, which is just 2 short months away. And then we're not back in session until the 131st is elected and put in, unless we come back for a special session, which we absolutely could as the 130th. That is something that is available to us. But if we don't, is there provision that there's been something going on that needs to be addressed immediately without us in session? Can something be put in that we, and then if they do put it in, is there a way to make sure that as the Committee of Jurisdiction, we review that upon our return, immediately upon our return? So that would be where I wouldn't want it to go into effect permanent. I'd want it to be something that we do absolutely review, but is it something? I'm just trying to find out if that's something that can be done.
I'm going to ask Sam to answer that question. I see his hand is up, and Representative Corey, if you could defer. Sam.
Thanks, Senator Hickman. I think we could probably draft that. I haven't seen it done before, and it would probably. I'm going to avoid trying to draft like on the spot in committee, but I think as long as I were clear on the direction, if the committee wanted to allow in certain circumstances the rules to be basically adopted, maybe for a certain time period, and then require that they have, within that time period, they have to be approved. Otherwise they go out of effect. I suppose that is possible. My one functionality concern would be just to, you might want to think about what happens then when they go out of effect. So if the department is relying on a set of rules and then they go out of effect, how that might affect like the processes and programs that they're putting in place with the rules. I don't know. I suspect we could draft it if you want to go that way. I just will need more time to put that together. Does that help?
Representative Kinney, it's an answer to your question.
Yes, it does. Yeah, and it may not work, but it's something that's popping into my head.
Sam, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if there were another state of emergency declared by the governor, a state of emergency typically renders all of the laws unenforceable if the governor declares a state of emergency and then can accept what the legislature has done in statute with something that comes in a proclamation. Is that correct, Sam?
I am not terribly familiar with how the state of emergency laws work. I really would have to go look. The one thing I just will say, regarding the MAP process, just so everyone knows. So when rules are submitted to the legislature for review, the department first provisionally adopts the rules, and then they have to be approved or in the normal process if they're not acted on and they were submitted before the deadline, then the department can finally adopt them. And I'm going to double check on this as well, but my understanding is that at the provisional adoption phase, rules are not enforceable. So it's really kind of like a process step rather than a actual adoption of real rules. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So don't be thrown by the word provisionally adopted thinking oh, they were provisionally adopted and they could still enforce them. I don't think that's the case.
Thank you. Yeah. So Representative Corey, followed by Representative Wood and Representative Kitty.
Right. So, it was mentioned that, I think that the legislature, this legislature, or any legislature can't handcuff another. So, whether we go 2 years or 5 years or whatever it is, this is why 5 years doesn't bother me. I think this committee is going to get sick of dealing with this in another 2 or 3 years. And we'll probably say, look, maybe we trust the department now, or, we want to work with the department now in this. That I think if we put a 5-year, sunset provision on it, who knows, 3 years from now, everything could be working great with the department and everything, everybody, feels like, it's a mature, regulator, then meaning that it's, been around long enough that I don't imagine this committee at this point really, or that point really going to want to be involved with it anyway. So, a 5-year, sunset provision can end up becoming a 2-year, sunset provision if the next legislature wants to change the law. So, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, it doesn't matter to me.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to make sure that I understand the scenario. And I did ask this in a meeting last week. And I just need to keep asking it, I guess, to make sure that I understand. But we passed LD 1242 last year, which says that all rules are major substantive, so they have to come before the committee. This is closing the loophole that if the legislature fails to act, that in the current state, major substantive rules could be put into place in the current world. This bill closes that loophole so that they cannot go into effect. Is that the major intent of this LD 1784?
I will ask Ms. Melnick to answer that question.
Yes, that is absolutely the intent, is to get some predictability and to close that loophole so that and I think in some interesting ways, perhaps that's what some people, including some stakeholders and potentially even some lawmakers, thought was being done with 1242. When you say major substantive rulemaking, I think one just colloquially thinks that means, the legislature reviews and approves the rules. But there is this loophole in there that I think is well intended in the APA for the vast majority of things that would come up within the rulemaking process. And that's why we're asking for a narrow exception here for this process.
Thank you. If I could continue with making sure I understand, Senator Hickman. So rulemaking is going to continue. I mean, the same work is going to happen for those, I think, who I said, oh, this is going to stop rulemaking for 5 years. Rulemaking will still happen. It's just that if for some reason And the example everybody has is the pandemic where the legislature closed early. Things would have gone into effect, or at least provisionally. But this is just to close that little thing that it can't happen. It can't go into effect truly, truly, truly without legislative approval. The rulemaking still happens. This committee still can review those new rules. This committee can send this on to the floor for a vote. So I'm supportive of all that. And as far as, I also support a sunset. For me, I mean, we're all throwing out different times. 5 seems a little long. I think that to Representative Corey's piece, well, any other legislator could change it. But if it came up for review after a few years, then at least we'd be assured that somebody's looking at it in a few years and saying, okay, it needs to continue longer. I mean, we've done that on a lot of the liquor laws this year because of the pandemic. They had sunsets, they were temporary, and we've decided for them to go on, but they came back to us because they had a date that wasn't 5 years out. For me, I'm looking at a 3-year time frame because that gives us 2 summers to get through. So we get through all of the 131st, and then we get through another summer and into the 132nd, and then that legislature would review the sunset and see if it needs to continue or to end or be made permanent, whatever. So that's where I'm at right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Kinney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make it clear, I'm not worried necessarily about another state of emergency kind of position. I'm more concerned about the fact that in my tenure, we have adjourned in April for second regular session and not come back until the following January. That's 8 to 9 months, depending on how you look at it, before we're back in session, and rules might need to occur that we don't know need to occur. They could come up, some kind of an emergency within the program could come up. And now what this will do is say that you can't add a new rule to protect protect children, protect some, I don't know what could come up. That's why it would be an emergency. That's the kind of emergency that I'm concerned about.
Thank you, Representative Kennedy, for that clarity. I think, Sam, can you help me with that scenario? Isn't it true that under major substantive rules that couldn't happen anyway? Like the rules still have to be presented to the legislature the very next session. And if we didn't pass this bill, they would be provisionally adopted. And if we took no action on it, they would go into effect. So I don't know that emergency rulemaking can happen in between sessions. Can you help me with that, Sam?
You're correct, Senator Hickman, that when it comes to major substantive rules, a necessary part of the process is that they are submitted to the legislature for review. So regardless of whether this bill passes, that piece of the process is required to happen. I suppose there's nothing to prevent a legislature from calling a special session over the interim and handling it that way. But there will have to be an opportunity for legislative review, regardless of whether this bill passes. The key factor with this bill is that normally when major substantive rules are submitted on time, if the legislature fails to act, whether it's a bill fails to pass or they're just set aside or ignored, they would go into effect, where this bill would make it so the legislature basically has to affirm them by law. Did that help?
I think it helps. And I think that basically what Representative Kinney is talking about is if the rules were routine technical and something needed to change over the summer, then the department could issue the routine technical rulemaking process to change something in an emergency way. But I think with major substantive rules, there's just no way for them to go into effect without the legislature at least having the opportunity to review them and say yay or nay. Representative Kenny, maybe I'm hearing you wrong. So your hand is up and you're shaking your head. So correct me.
No, I'm not confusing routine technical with major substantive. It sounds like what Sam just said with major substantive rules, they all have to come before us anyway. So this legislation does not seem necessary at all because major substantive has to come before us. So I'll make a motion not to pass.
The motion is ought not to pass. Is there a second? Seeing no second, Sam?
I'll second that. Sorry, slow on the draw.
So the motion is ought not to pass.
me too.
Been made by Representative Kenny and seconded by Representative Piazza. Representative McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I still need help on understanding. And I wonder if Representative Wood, can I ask Representative Wood to go through the first thing that she said when she was getting clarity on this?
Representative.
Why this is different from what we passed last time.
I'm gonna allow Representative Wood to answer the question, but Sam's hand is raised. And so I'm gonna first go to the analyst, Sam.
I'm sorry for I don't want to derail everybody, but I do want to pull up a provision in the Administrative Procedure Act that I hadn't been familiar with until just looking at it right now. Is that okay?
Yes, please pull it up.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Can everybody see this? So in Title V, Section 8054, there is this provision about emergency rulemaking. And it reads in subsection 1 that if the agency finds that immediate adoption of a rule by procedures other than those set forth in sections 8052 or 8053 is necessary to avoid an immediate threat to public health, safety, or general welfare, it may modify those procedures to the minimum extent required to enable adoption of rules designed to mitigate or alleviate the threat found. Emergency rules shall be subject to the requirements of section 8056, which I can pull up if you'd like. And then you'll see down here that there's a findings requirement, there's a fiscal impact discussion, and then there's an emergency period. An emergency rule shall be effective only for 90 days or any lesser period of time specified in an enabling statute or in the emergency rule. So just want to point this out for the committee. I was not familiar with it before. It is in our law. I don't know how it impacts the rules that committee members are currently contemplating that might be necessary, but just wanted to make sure you were aware of it.
So thank you for putting this up, Sam. This provision of the Administrative Procedures Act seems to address, and I'm saying seems, the question that Representative Kenny raised, so that if we are out of session and something requires rules to go into effect when we're out of session, the emergency rulemaking process would hold sway, and those rules could only be effective for 90 days. Is that what that says on its face? Just could you put that back up, please, Sam? Thank you.
I apologize. Yes, pull it back up. Yes, as you mentioned, the emergency period is limited to 90 days under subsection 3.
And can you go to section 8056 where it says emergency rules shall be subject to the requirements of section 8056, please? So this is the way in which all rules are filed, correct?
Like I said, I want to review this again before I'm making analysis on the fly.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Okay. Thank you, Chairman Chiazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Sam. I just want to make sure I'm clear too. That's how MAPA is currently structured. But if we vote for this, we're suspending all MAPA for this exception, aren't we? This is notwithstanding means this is not touching the Administrative Procedure Act, but it's carving out an exception that it doesn't apply to rulemaking for adult for medical. Is that correct, or am I misunderstanding?
Sam?
Okay, so a couple things. So, and I'm sorry, I just didn't anticipate the emergency conversation happening. So, I will answer that question, and then there's also a specific section in here about emergency major substantive rules in the period for which those may be effective. But just to answer that question, the exception that's created in this bill is just in reference to 8072 subsection 11, which is the legislative approval portion, and without doing a more deep analysis that I really don't want to have people rely on the fly. I don't know how these two sections would interact with each other. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that.
And is my screen still, are people able to see where my screen is pulled up on 8073 emergency major substantive rules?
Yes.
Okay, so this one reads that major substantive rules are subject to the emergency rulemaking procedures required under subchapter 2, except that a major substantive rule adopted on an emergency basis after the deadline for submission to the legislature for review under 8072, which is the provision exempted in this bill, may be effective for up to 12 months or until the legislature has completed review as provided in that section. And then after the expiration of the emergency period, an emergency rule may not be adopted except in the manner provided by section 8072. So I think that this probably is the more applicable provision when it comes to the rules we're talking about in this bill. And what I will say is if the committee moves forward and wants to be clear about how and when emergency major substantive rules apply, I would want to take just a little bit more time myself to be clear that the way we draft the exception to the standard process doesn't override the emergency provisions, if that's something you want to still allow. Does that make sense?
Or does override the emergency provisions if that is the will of the committee and the intent of this legislation?
Correct. Like if you don't want the emergency provisions to be applicable, then we should be. We'll make that clear, and if you do want them to be, we'll also make that clear. Whatever is the intent.
So I want to just have, and you can stop sharing your screen, sir. Thank you very much. Representative Wood did describe earlier the reason why this bill is necessary, but I'm going to ask Alicia Melnick to review that one more time for the committee in the clearest possible terms so that there's no confusion about just because these are major substantive rules that come back to the legislature for review doesn't mean that they require an affirmative vote to become finally adopted. Alicia?
That's exactly right. As was said, this bill does not alter the major substantive rulemaking process in any other way. The rulemaking process that is happening currently is still, this would not alter that or derail that process that is happening currently. And the rules that are currently on the books are still enforceable. So I just want to make it clear that this bill would not make it so there either are no rules, or B, that it would pause the rulemaking process in any way. That is not what this bill would do. This bill would simply, as we keep saying, close the loophole so that the legislature would have to affirmatively act to either approve the rules that were presented to you all or direct OMP to revise the rules that were presented to you in a certain way. Without this loophole being closed, the legislature could consider the rules, but without acting for a whole host of reasons that you all have talked about, either an emergency adjournment, there's just, a lot of complexity and the session runs late, that those rules are not put onto the industry and to patients without the legislature's affirmative action. And I think you all heard a number of examples of the first and second and third iteration of the rules that would have been really problematic for folks and would have put them either out of business or required surveillance of patients and that kind of thing. And I think the sort of concerns that those lead to are not things that then can be just the legislature could take up again and change without that damage, being done. Once you have exposure of a patient to law enforcement or you have a business closing, it's much harder to recover from that. So in the simplest terms, this would require that the legislature affirmatively act before any changes to the rules were made.
Representative McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we were in person, I'd speak with Representative Wood in the hallway, but we're not. So moving on, I wonder if Secretary of State Bellows would like to comment on where we are at this point. And I don't know if Director Gunderson is still here. I wonder if it'd be possible to hear from them if they're willing.
I will see if they are willing by inviting them into the meeting, and if they accept, that means they're willing. I will begin with Secretary of State Shanna Bellows to see if she is willing to provide a take on this. I will say that one of the ways that the legislature can also fail to act, and I don't mean to confuse folks, but I just want to make it clear that if we don't agree on an action and therefore nothing passes or fails, then we have not acted on the rules and they will also go into effect. So that's, to me, another reason why this bill is necessary, because it requires that our action is affirmative one way or the other. Yes, we take the rules, or no, we don't. And that is another reason why it's important to put it this way. If I've said that incorrectly, Secretary of State will correct me. So we have here from the office of the Secretary of State, not Shanna Bellows herself, but it looks like Ms. Packard, is that correct? Is that who I recognize? Please introduce yourself.
I'm Melissa Packard. I'm the Director of Elections and the Administrative Procedure Act.
Great.
We really don't have a dog in this fight, except that our initial response was that we would want to know about this. If there are a reason that the rules couldn't go into effect, that's why we put the request of the cross-reference. But I'm not a lawyer, but I think there is a question of whether you could still do emergency law rules. I think that is the bill as written addresses final adoption. So an emergency adoption is not a final adoption. So I think there is a question of whether those rules could go on an emergency basis. And basically the major difference between emergency adoption and routine or the regular process is that when you do a regular process, which includes the emergency adoption of or a major substantive adoption, you have to have opportunity for public input. And the major substantive process requires a public hearing so that people can comment. Initially they were in person, but now they're also done by Zoom, but it allows the interested parties to do public comments. And even if there's also the opportunity for written comment so that that the people can comment on the rules and what the effect they think that would be. With an emergency adoption, that public input isn't required initially, but then to get those rules into effect permanently, there is a requirement for public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Packard. Are there any questions for Ms. Packard about the way in which rules are finally adopted if they are major substantive? Chairman Chiazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Packard, and I understand if you're going to, if an agency is going to propose emergency legislation, or emergency rulemaking, they have to justify that with a pretty robust justification. Is that correct?
Yes, if they want to do emergency adoption, whether it's routine technical or major substantive, they have to include the basis of why that emergency is needed and include that with the adoption packet that is filed with our office and is put on file so that it can be reviewed by anyone.
Representative Kenny?
Not just yet. I'm still thinking of how to word this.
No problem. Any other questions from Melissa Packard? Thank you for being here. I will just ask you to turn off your video, but remain in case there is a question for you. Thank you very much. Director Gunderson, please turn on your video. And it looks like Representative McCray may have a question for you. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr.
Gunderson.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative
Chair. And sorry, Director Gunderson, I just wondered if you had any comments as this discussion has continued on this bill. And if not, that's okay.
No, yeah, thank you for asking. I think the only thing I would say is, obviously, we have a concern around just being able to pass any rule. Obviously, the rule that we've been operating with is already 4 or 5 years out of date. We've noticed the disconnect between what's statutory allowed and what's not. And I don't believe this is necessarily closing a loophole in the MAPA process. I think it's just creating a new one. Last year, less than a year ago, the legislature voted to make the rules major substantive, which is all well and good. So I'm just a little bit confused why this would be needed. And I think we all agree that at some point we do need a rule. And this just opens up the opportunity for it to go year after year after year without actually getting a rule, a much needed rule across the finish line.
Any other questions for the director? Thank you for your answer. I do believe that you guys did testify in opposition to the bill, or neither for nor against. I can't remember which at this point. We can look that up. Any other questions from the committee for director? Seeing none. So the motion before us is ought not to pass, made by Representative Kenny and seconded by Representative Doloff. I'm sorry, Representative Chiazzo seconded the motion. Is there any other discussion about the motion before the committee? Is the committee ready for the question? Darlene, please call the roll.
Senator Hickman,
No.
Senator Marmont,
No.
Senator Farren. No, he's not there. We'll come back to him. Representative Ciazzo,
Yes.
Representative McCray,
Yes.
Representative Riley,
No.
Representative Supika,
No.
Representative Wood,
No.
Representative Kinney,
Yes.
Representative Harrington is absent. Representative Corey,
No.
Representative Doloff,
Yes.
is Senator Farren back? Nope. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 in the affirmative. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6 in the negative. And 2 absent.
Thank you, Darlene. 4 members voting in the affirmative and 6 in the negative. The motion fails. I'm going to ask Sam to finish his bill analysis on this bill before we ask for a different motion.
All right, let me get it pulled back up. And I actually really, there are a lot of words, but not a lot left for me to say.
That's fine. Appreciate it very much.
So my bill analysis is now back on the screen. The only part of my bill analysis that I didn't walk the committee through, and I actually wasn't going to walk you through it word by word, is as I provided on LD 1928, I provided you statutory excerpts and links to the parts of the MAPA process that refer to economic impact, fiscal impact, and cost benefit analyses. So you could have them there for your consideration. And I just know that this is something that gets brought up a lot when it comes to the rules. So I wanted the committee to have that statutory language in front of you. And that's really all I have left.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we got a complete analysis on this bill. Are there any questions about this extra section regarding the impact on small business? Okay, So we are at a place where there seemed to have been agreement before the last motion failed that we might consider something different. Representative Corey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to propose an amendment. I guess I'll make a motion to out to pass as amended with a 3-year sunset provision on it.
And will your amendment include the cross-reference provided by the Secretary of State in the bill analysis?
Sure.
It's been moved. Ought to pass as amended with a 3-year sunset provision on this, what we call closing of loophole amendment to the Administrative Procedures Act for legislative approval of all major substantive rules that come from the department. Senator Mearmont, is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Senator Mearmont, did you have a comment on the motion?
No,
Or
it was a second.
Okay, great. Representative McCray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does the amendment also include what we, Sam discussed with us about notwithstanding versus some other way of wording this?
Sam has his hand up because I'm sure he needs a question about the motion to get clarity. So I'm going to move to Sam first.
That is actually kind of precisely the point I wanted to ask. So in my bill analysis, I basically suggested that if you add this option that the legislature must approve the rules as kind of as part of the MAPA process, it makes sense to remove the notwithstanding from the bill because you don't want those to kind of like cancel each other out. And I suggested to the committee that if you do that, you may also want to go and amend the mining provision too, so it doesn't cancel out that notwithstanding also doesn't cancel out the change you're making.
So thank you for that, Sam. It's the bill sponsor's intent that we are creating exception to MAPA. We are not changing MAPA. So whatever language would be required to make the exception clear is what the intended amendment should do. Is that correct, Representative Corey?
I'm good with that.
Does that make it clear for you, Sam, that we are trying to accept MAPA, not change it? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Representative Kenny.
Press the right button. Lower hand does not unmute me. Okay, so 3-year sunset, which we know with the next legislature could turn around and remove this whole thing because we don't have to keep them. We don't hold them by the hand. They could turn around and repeal this whole thing next legislative session. But I'm a little confused on the notwithstanding piece. So what we're trying to do, so currently major substantive rule changes. If the legislature does ought not to pass or does something else, because I know we've always had to adopt major substantive rule changes have to have an affirmative vote. So they have to be ought to pass as amended, ought to pass. It's usually either ought to pass or ought to pass as amended. When you amend it, sometimes you can say we don't accept these rules. So does this say that we can't do an ought to pass as amended? And I mean, I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out if a vote like ought to pass as amended to not adapt the rules, if that fails with the full legislature, technically we haven't done anything. Does that turn around, because the way current major substantive rule changes work, that would end up meaning the rules could go into effect? And is this saying that that wouldn't be able to happen?
I'm going to ask Sam to answer that question.
All right. Yeah, I absolutely understand the confusion, particularly because the major substantive rule process and the way the votes go sometimes is confusing even for me. So I'll try to make it as clear as I can. So without this bill, if this bill in front of you doesn't happen, basically if a major substantive rule is submitted on time. So if it's late, that's a different situation. But if it's submitted on time and the legislature fails to act, so you pass no bills regarding that major substantive rule. And that includes the situation where, maybe a bill came out of committee to deny the rule and that bill failed on the floor. The rule would be allowed to go into effect. The change this bill makes is that you need legislation affirmatively approving the rule for it to go into effect. Representative Kinney, you're correct in that in the situation you described, if this bill passes, the rule would not be allowed to go into effect. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Sam.
Absolutely.
Representative McCray, does that help you as well?
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Sam, always. I just wanted to say I appreciate the compromise on the length of sunset. And I think I can go along with it, though I remain with questions about it.
Representative Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I understood what Sam just described, but I was not sure what Representative Kinney's question was. So I'm trying to put the two together. So if Representative Kinney, can you repeat your question and then I'll tag in Sam's answer?
Representative Kinney?
Sure. So, and I know it actually took me hearing Janet Stokoe's description of how major substantive rules work for me to finally, I'm in my fourth term and I've dealt with major substantive rules in other committees, and they're very confusing because the biggest one I remember is was in ag on, and Senator Hickman will know this, was on the tier pricing for milk. So the last two times that bill came before us as major substantive rule changes, we had to actually pass a motion, had to be ought to pass as amended, that we do not accept the rules as written. So what we have to do with major substantive rules is, if they're going to pass, we'd have to say ought to pass or ought to pass as amended, similar to what we're doing with any bill where we amend the language. In the event we pass something that was ought to pass as amended, where we do not accept the rules, and the legislature in turn doesn't pass that motion on the floor of the House and or the Senate, the rules would then go into place anyway without our approval because we failed to act on the rule change.
That's correct.
What this bill is going to do is say if we fail to act, it's not going to go into effect automatically. It has to have an affirmative vote from committee and at the legislative level of the two bodies. And then the governor has to sign it.
That is correct. Thank you, Representative Kinney, for that. So does that help you, Representative Wood, with failing to act means we're not here to act, or that we can't agree on what to do with the rule, and so nothing passes? The rule will go into effect. That's called the loophole. And I'm putting that in quotation marks because it's not really a loophole. It's just the way the Administrative Procedure Act works. So in this case, what Representative Kinney described, if this bill is in effect for 3 years, the rules couldn't go into effect because the legislature didn't agree that they shouldn't go into effect. Does that make sense? Great. Chairman Chiazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that in essence was my concern initially, is that, well, the legislature has a hard time acting on a lot of things. So I can accept the compromise of 3 years to see how this process works out. Hopefully we can get, the burden is on the legislature to get this done. Burden was on us when in 1242, when we decided to make it major substantive. I do have some real concerns about upsetting MAPA and making the exception. I know the precedent has been made in mining. I don't think it was a good precedent. However, I understand the situation here with the challenges between the industry and the governing department. I can acknowledge those as a one-off exception, and hopefully this gives some time for us to get some rules. If we get through 3 years and there's no additional rules in medical, then I would hope a future legislature would act and make adjustments to statutory language or something else, because I think that is my concern, is that we will continue with the status quo and nothing will change. So I can support the compromise for 3 years reluctantly, but I certainly, I think it's worth the experiment to see how it plays out.
Thank you, Chairman. And it should be said that the legislature could affirmatively act to adopt the rules that come out of the department through the major substantive rulemaking process. So we should give ourselves, a little bit of respect that we may come together and say, yay, these rules should be adopted and we're good to go because they have had legislative review. Are there any other comments on the motion ought to pass as amended as made by Representative Corey? Committee ready for the question? Darlene, please call the roll.
Senator Hickman,
Yay.
Senator Marymount,
Yay.
Senator Farren,
Yay.
Representative Chiazza,
Yes.
Representative McCrae,
Yes.
Representative Riley,
Yes.
Representative Supika,
Yes.
Representative Wood,
Yes.
Representative Kinney,
Yes.
Representative Harrington is absent, Representative Corey,
Yes.
and Representative Dolph.
Yes.
12 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative. No, 11 in the affirmative, 1 absent. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Darlene. 11 members voting in the affirmative and none in the negative with 1 absent. The motion prevails. LD 1928 work session is now closed. Members who are absent on any of the votes that we took today, all unanimous, will have until Wednesday at noon to cast their votes. It's not noon, it's a little afternoon, but I think we did great. Thank you all very much. It's 12:28. Do we need, Sam, is there anything else you have for us? The committee isn't scheduled to meet for the rest of this week, and that is going to maintain itself. The chair and I will meet shortly to discuss our schedule. I know that we have some public hearings that will likely be scheduled for Friday, February 25th. And that may also be the day that anything that we have had tabled so far will be scheduled, unless we decide to do some liquor bills on this Friday, the 18th. But that is not what we intend to do unless the chairman and I discuss it and decide we have to. But we're in good stead with the amount of work we are voting on, and more bills are being reported out as we speak. We have a 100% voting deadline on March the 11th, and I see no reason, barring emergencies, why we won't make that deadline as well. So unless anyone has anything else, we stand adjourned today. Happy Valentine's Day. Enjoy your friends and family and loved ones, and stay safe and healthy, and we will see you Wednesday in session. The Joint Standing Committee on Veterans and Legal Affairs stands adjourned.
Bye-bye.
See you, folks.
Senator Hickman, are you upstairs?
Yes, I am.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
Thank you.
Thank you.